CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlin, and today we're talking about teens and pot and why it's not just no big deal anymore. Maybe if you thought that. Child psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders is joining me now as we're seeing more teens become addicted to cannabis since it's been legalized, and even some are experiencing episodes of psychosis. Dr. Saunders is a child psychologist at the Institute of Living. Thank you so much for being with us, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
So let's just address the no big deal part. A lot of times people have thought, oh, there's the harsh drugs, but a little pot, no big deal. Why have things changed?
Well, the reality is the marijuana of the 70s and even 80s is very different than the marijuana of today, right? It is loaded and it is much, much more potent than it was in 40, 50 years ago. It is a very different substance. So that's part one. Part two is, we're talking about the adolescent brain, and we know more about the adolescent brain than we ever have. And so things that marijuana does to the brain really does have a negative effect on learning and mental health.
And that's really the difference. You're not here to judge adults who may be using cannabis legally, because certainly it has been legalized, but it's totally different when you're talking about a developing brain, much like pregnant women can't do certain things that other adults can do.
Yes, and I get a lot of my really good information from my colleague, Dr. Craig Allen, who's the medical director at Rushford, right? Rushford is the entity in Hartford HealthCare that really specializes in substance use. And so this information is not just the opinion of, Laura Saunders. This is really, the top research-based information. And what we know is that very often, folks start smoking or drinking before 18. So this is an adolescent use issue that we're talking about. And, while it's sort of widely believed that marijuana is not addictive, at least not in the same way that other things can be addictive, it is very emotionally addicting in that you feel dependent on using it if you're using it for anxiety or going to sleep. I know medical marijuana is used. I'm not a proponent of it being used for significant anxiety disorders or PTSD because of some of the dependency issues and some of the rebound anxiety that it can cause.
Okay, so we're going to get into that because most people would think that marijuana would actually help with anxiety. That's what some people think. Oh, it's going to chill you out. It's going to help you sleep. This is why more and more teens in your office are saying that they're using it on a regular basis. But you're saying that at this point, especially since the legalization of marijuana, adolescent substance abuse is a serious public health problem.
Yes, it's always been a serious public health problem, but it's kind of exploding since so many states now have legalized marijuana. And it's interesting because when I do like intakes or clinical interviews, or, with young people, I'll ask kind of just some standard questions on use of substances, and that could be, nicotine, it could be caffeine, alcohol, and other substances, including marijuana or cannabis. It is very interesting to me, when however many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, when I started practicing, teens did experiment more with alcohol. But almost unanimously, I'm seeing far more teens using marijuana, cannabis, weed, whatever word they use. Pot, it was called pot in my day. But they're using marijuana far more than they're using alcohol.
And believing that it's in some ways better for them, right?
Yeah, they believe it's a natural substance that grows, and so therefore it is harmless. And here's the reality: like anything, the reason that you're using something, and what it might be masking or what it might be trying to cover up, and the intensity and quantity of use make a huge difference. If you're and as I say, if you're 30 years old and you have a full-time job and you've got a good relationship and you've got, good family connections in your life, and you occasionally, use marijuana socially, I'm not worried about those folks. I'm worried about the 16-year-old who is wanting to smoke marijuana every night or use it as an edible or use it in their vape pen, because that's often how they use it. They want to use it every day. And so now that they're developing this kind of emotional dependence on it. And as you use something like that more and more often, it will have effects on your brain. And marijuana is different from alcohol in that marijuana builds in the system over time, right? Someone could ingest marijuana today and test positive for it 2 weeks from today, right? And alcohol's not the same. It's metabolized very differently. And marijuana is stored in the fat cells in the body. Where's the greatest source of fat in your body? It's actually your brain, right? So marijuana that gets, residual THC that gets stored in your brain affects your attention and it affects your motivation. And that's and it has the downward effects of affecting mood, affecting performance, academic performance, affecting relationships. And that's where you start to see the problems really unfold.
So that's how parents can look and see, if your child, I know teens like to sleep in, but if they're really sleeping or maybe they procrastinate, but they're really putting things off, marijuana affects our motivation.
Yes. And what we're looking for is not just a change in functioning, because, we know that teens can sometimes be moody. What we're looking for in these situations is a more ongoing change. So it's not just been a couple weeks that they seem kind of irritable. Now it's been months, right? Since last spring, or now that, their grades are really suffering. Not only are they, they're overly tired, or they seem to be staying up at night. You can't get them up for school in the morning. Now they're starting to miss days of school or going in late to school. Seeing, that their academic performance is being affected. They're not completing assignments. They don't really care anymore. This is a really critical time for seniors, because this is a time where they're getting all their stuff together, ready to apply to college. And now they don't really care about applying to college. They'll just go, figure out a community college. And I love the community college system. I'm not putting that down. But we're seeing changes in functioning, or a serious, a pattern of behavior that's affecting their ability to function.
Yeah. Let's just give some statistics so that parents can wrap their head around this, and then we'll talk about how you're going to have these conversations. But 75% of high school students have used addictive substances. 46% of high school students are current users, that's almost half. And 12% of high school students are actually addicted. Those are your numbers.
Yeah, that's really serious, right? And we know that, as I said, the cannabis today contains about 10 times more THC than it did in the 1970s. Now, THC is the psychoactive component of marijuana. It's the part that makes you feel high, and as we're learning more and more, there are some pathways for individuals with underlying vulnerabilities where marijuana can become a pathway to some psychosis.
Well, that's the thing. If I literally, after speaking to you, went and told my kids, marijuana can cause psychosis. And of course they gave me that look like, Mom, come on. No, it doesn't. I don't want to smoking it, but no, marijuana does not cause psychosis. I got the, Mom, what do you know look? And I said, no, it does. And in fact, there's a lot of research, and we're seeing a huge increase of teens ending up in local ERs here in Connecticut, and I'm sure it's the same way across the nation, seeing things, feeling is really freaking out. And talk about how cannabis is now linked to psychosis, especially in young people.
Right. I have colleagues here at the Institute of Living, Godfrey Perlson being one of them, who has a book out on, marijuana and, some of the pathways towards psychosis. It's a very serious issue and currently being studied. And so, there's some question that did they have an underlying vulnerability? Psychosis is that disconnect from reality, where you could have hallucinations, which are experiences that are, not real, or delusions, which are false beliefs. So having psychotic-like experiences or psychotic experiences where you are disconnected from reality. You are seeing things that are not there or hearing things that are not there or developing false beliefs, right? Delusional beliefs. So this is a serious matter, and we don't know which teens or young adults would be affected more than others. So that's why it's really, really important that we try to educate not just our young people, but their parents as well, and provide information and support when necessary.
So let's also talk about, now that it's legal here in Connecticut, again, for adults, and part of this research is what's happening on the developing brain. But you'll also hear, I'm not one of those parents, but I do know some who say, I just don't want my kid getting anything laced, so if they really want to experiment, we'll get it from the dispensary. At least it's safe. It's safe if you get it from the dispensary. Even if you're getting, quote unquote, legal pot from a dispensary, can it still have these ill effects on the adolescent brain?
Absolutely, right? And again, what happens in those situations is the trickle down. So now your parent has given you access to marijuana, and I mean, that is not just implicit, that is explicit permission to engage in substance use, right? And it is illegal, and we don't know who it can really seriously negatively affect. Now, am I going to get worked up about a one-time experience, or is this, just a pathway to teens feeling like they have permission and then going out and engaging in these behaviors even more so? And one of the things I said on Great Day today is, what's one of the core reasons why adolescents engage in substance use? It's to mask emotional pain.
Okay.
So there's something bigger going on, that now they're engaging in regular substance use, marijuana use, because it is pretty accessible for a lot of young people. It's masking deeper emotional pain. So it's not solving the problem, it is masking the emotional pain.
And those are for the people, we're not condoning cannabis use in a young person at all, in any time. However, you're less concerned about, they went to a party and there was some peer pressure and they tried something, versus the kids are like, oh, I can't sleep without it, or I just take a half a gummy at night. But the repetitive use is actually creating a dependence in the brain, and it's changing the part of the brain that controls attention and memory. So studies are showing that they end up with lower processing speeds, worse performance on tests, worse performance in memory.
Yes, right. I mean, I always boil it down to the two biggest effects are attention and motivation, right? So these kids are unmotivated. And again, I like to be very realistic. Am I, confident that no teen, and I think actually the law says under 21 for marijuana use. I could be wrong on that, but has it, every teen that's ever tried marijuana been, cognitively damaged? I'm not unrealistic. I know that, a lot of times people justify their use because they know someone, they use, they smoke weed all the time, or they take an edible or have a dab pen or vape pen, and they're fine. But you don't know how it's going to affect you. So I don't want to use that, someone else did it and they're fine.
Yeah.
You don't know how it's going to affect you. And you don't really know, what your history is. And it's the regular use that I'm very concerned about, because that's what leads to bigger problems.
Define regular use. What if someone's just doing it every weekend? Is that still regular use?
To me, every weekend is regular use. So at that point, it's regular use. They're going to events or parties or whatever, and they're using. I'm equally, or maybe even more concerned about individuals who start that way, and now they're using on their own, right? So it's not even the social connection around it anymore. It's the, I'm isolated, I'm using it to deal with my anxiety, my depression, my emotional pain, my feelings of inadequacy, whatever they are. Now it's really becoming more of what we call negative coping, right? A positive coping skill is something that you engage in that can relieve your emotional pain or relieve your stress. And negative coping actually also relieves stress, but it has a negative side effect to it. And that's why we call it negative coping.
Well, yeah, I mean, people who use will say, well, it really helps with my anxiety. That's what you hear. But in fact, what you want people to understand, especially as we talk about teens and we're trying to have this conversation with our kids, it actually will make your anxiety worse.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of folks actually, especially when you're using it as your sole means of reducing anxiety, you're going to get rebound anxiety.
What's
right?
that?
It's going to be, it's going to sort of, I mean, I've heard, so many people say, well, it relieves my anxiety. Okay, it did. But then 4 hours later, when your anxiety level peaks again, what are you having to do? You're having to smoke again or take another edible, right? So it's not actually reducing the overall level of anxiety. It's kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. So that's why it's negative coping, right? Because it's not actually helping in the long run. It's not circumventing the anxiety or kind of helping you level off. It's putting a Band-Aid on it, because then when you're 4 hours later, when your anxiety peaks again, you have to do the same thing.
Okay. There's also a lot on the internet, and again, you shouldn't believe everything you're teaching us science-based research, and that's affecting real kids here in Connecticut. But it'll say, oh, cannabis can help with ADHD, anxiety, mood. I mean, the cannabis, edibles, ours are pure, and they're this, and they'll help alleviate ADHD. In fact, the research shows that it actually, the people with those psychiatric diagnoses, such as mood anxiety disorders or ADHD, are at a bigger risk for substance abuse.
Yeah. And, I really don't want, I don't want substances like this to be used as a way to manage an underlying psychiatric issue. It's just not, it's not good practice. It's not helpful in the long run. It's negative coping. I get it. I hear teens say all the time, well, it did relieve my anxiety. Okay, that's true. But then, as I said, 4 hours later or 5 hours later, when your anxiety peaked again, what did you have to do? You had to do the same thing, right? So it's really not, it's a Band-Aid on the management of your anxiety. It's not really helping. And we know that, a lot of individuals who have serious substance use problems also have co-occurring mood, anxiety, and, sometimes then conduct or behavioral disorders.
Yeah. So let's talk about the conversations that you need to have with your kids. You mentioned that you could just get an over-the-counter test to determine, are your kids using? Do you advise that? I know you like to call yourself a middle-of-the-road psychologist. Should we just put our foot down and say, I'm testing you? And I know some parents who have used that as a strategy and said, I'm just going to keep testing my kids weekly so that they have that to fall back on and tell their friends. Or
yeah, I mean, you can do that. I mean, I think my concern is sort of then what, right? So, okay, so you test your child and, honestly, I think it should be done in conjunction with significant changes in their functioning, right? So you're not just taking, absolutely not recommending that all teens have regular drug tests, because that's just not needed, right? This is happening when it's co-occurring with significant changes in functioning, mood changes, academic problems, changes in appetite and sleeping, changes in friends and reluctance now to bring your friends around or talk about friends or talk about things. So you're seeing the co-occurring changes. You're concerned that your child actually has an underlying, maybe depressive disorder. You're seeing these changes. You might use one of the over-the-counter home tests. They're not always 100% accurate, so I would worry that you could get what's called a false positive or false negative. A false negative means that the person is using substances, but the test still came out negative. And so at that point, if that's your strategy and your teen is coming out regularly with using substances, it's time to take it to the next level.
And what parents also need to realize is they're starting to look for this. A lot of today's teens might not be rolling a joint like they did back in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. They're using it in a vape pen. And talk about what that looks like and why that can be even more dangerous. I know there's been a lot of articles that we're talking about sometimes levels of 90% THC, not to mention whatever chemicals are in those carts.
Right. We did a thing on vaping on Great Day. And yeah, I mean, those vape pens are really kind of like direct access. And there could be a lot more chemicals in there. There's a lot more that's coming out about breathing and lung problems with vape products. And that's nicotine as well. A lot of those vape products have all sorts of other chemicals mixed in with them. So the difference actually is those vape pens are easier to hide, right? Because they somehow control the way that it's like an electronic sort of lighting up. And so there's not as much sort of smoke or residue. And so they're easier to hide. So that's why schools are now putting in some technology to detect if, vape pens are happening in bathrooms. I always say, like, I knew in my high school which was the bathroom to avoid because the girls were smoking in there. But now it could be happening anywhere.
We're going to take a quick 10-second break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll talk about resources for parents about how they can get some help and treatment. Take a listen.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit wheelerhealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
Back with child psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders as we're talking about the growing problem of teens and pot, the usage of it, how it's affecting motivation and memory and cognitive function, and why there's just the belief that, hey, it's not that bad. I'd rather smoke pot than drink alcohol. Not that either one are really healthy for you, but you're seeing much more of a crisis with kids thinking this is no big deal. So I want to talk about first that open line of communication. How do we find out, what if we pretty much know or suspect? How do you have these conversations in the right way with our kids?
Oh, I mean, it starts with your observations. Like, listen, I've noticed that you're isolating a lot. You don't ever come out of your room. I mean, your grades have dropped significantly. You seem really, really kind of cranky and irritable all the time. You're sharing what you've observed. It starts with that. I'm concerned about you. I'm worried you might be feeling really bad about yourself, or, you seem to be lacking motivation, right? Share what you observe. Ask open-ended questions. Is there something that you want to talk about? I'm certainly open to talking. So really starting that way. And honestly, oftentimes you get, no, I'm fine. When I said, okay, but I'm just letting you know you don't look fine, right? You don't look okay to me. Things have definitely changed over the last few months. Since the summer, you're so much more moody and irritable. And I don't think you're fine. And I think something's wrong. And I'm just going to keep bringing this up to you, right? So these are never one and done conversations. They're ongoing conversations about what you observe and what you're concerned about. And it really is coming from a place of concern, not like, you need to be doing this and you need to be doing that, right? So that sort of a tone is really just going to cause the teen to shut down. You'll get no information.
Okay.
And so it's really kind of starting with, like, this is what I've noticed. This is what I've observed. I'm concerned. I'm here for you. Is there anything you want to tell me? I do worry in some situations, and I have seen this, where parents have some reluctance or fear or denial around confronting their teens on their substance use issues. And that's often because of their own or substance use issues or issues within the family system, that they're much less reluctant to confront that. But again, by confrontation, I'm not even talking like a confrontation, a conflict. I'm saying, listen, I've observed this, I'm concerned about you, and I'm letting you know.
Well, and even if you are someone who uses as an adult, you want us to be the best role models we can be, because adults in the house not coping healthy. But what if you are, and you're still concerned about your kids? Do you acknowledge that? Say, yeah, I've had a little bit of issue with this and I'm working on it, but I don't want you to have the same problems. Or vice versa, I'm an adult, sure, you've seen this, but your brain is like baby, developing. We don't want you to have these problems as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very, what we call courageous conversation, to say, listen, I'm concerned that I may be struggling a little bit with alcohol, or, I know you've seen or found out that that I've been smoking weed, or I've been smoking pot also, and I'm concerned about myself. And I want you to know that doesn't give you permission to be using, because you have a much younger and developing brain. I'm acknowledging that I have some issues. Those can be very powerful conversations, but I want them to be then the stepping stone to the adult actually doing something about it, and not just having, open conversations.
So let's talk about resources for parents. Number one, something called motivational enhancement therapy, also known as cognitive behavioral therapy. I assume we need a professional for that?
Right. And generally what you're looking for is what we call a motivational interview. What is the individual's willingness to acknowledge that there's a problem and step into the stages of change? Because if no one in the family system is willing to acknowledge there's a problem or step into the stages of change, very little is going to happen. So you do need to kind of do some of that motivational interviewing to assess kind of where they're at. And often, what you're really looking at is bringing up how the behavior, in this case, substance use, is negatively affecting their life, right? Your grades have changed. Now you're talking about not wanting to go to college when that used to be a goal of yours. You don't ever do things with friends, or you're doing things with friends all the time, but, I don't really want you going out during the week, right? Again, you're, talking about those observations. I mean, there's programs out there. A lot of times what you're looking to do is what we call harm reduction instead of just abstinence, although in teens, you really want to focus more on abstinence. There's programs called 7 Challenges. We know there's AA and NA out there, which is called a 12-step model. So there's a 7 Challenges model. So there's different models of treatment out there. And so it's just kind of doing some research on your own about what resources are in your area, and then, looking at what you feel like you need, and then asking for some help.
I mean, you mentioned the Rushford Clinic that's here in Connecticut. You might need a referral to go there, but just the basic conversation we might have skipped over in our final 2 minutes. You do think we need a professional. If you can't get in with a therapist, if you're not already in family therapy, you got to wait. Start with the pediatrician, and you would recommend maybe a little private conversation first of, this is what I'm noticing, I'm really concerned, and I think, there's some substance use going on.
Yeah, I mean, the pediatrician really is the go-to professional for young people. And pediatric offices, if they, more and more, they have a built-in behavioral health provider, which is an awesome model to have, that integrated model. But they also have access to resources if you have concerns. So it is reaching out to get some information and resources, maybe having the pediatrician evaluate them. They can help you with some, self-report measures to start the ball rolling. Sometimes I worry in self-report measures that people are not going to report accurately what their behavior actually is, but you're still seeing a lot of the signs and symptoms. And then, taking some next steps to actually get some help.
Okay, and we're running out of time, but I want to encourage folks, this is a nice, easy way. Put on this podcast in the car. Ask your kids to listen. I often do that with my kids. They might want to listen to Dr. Saunders more than me. But also you can share this with the counselors at school. They're starting to, the little videos that we can get conversations going. Part of it's just raising awareness that you want people to understand that cannabis isn't just no big deal, at least for teens, especially for teens, now that it's legal. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Saunders.
Thank you, Kara.
And you can find Dr. Saunders at the Institute of Living. You can find me on social media at Kara Sundlin. I do like to share this content there. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.
CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.